We're on our series of sermons on Nehemiah, and our theme today is being courageous. I don't know, have any of you been watching the Winter Olympics? I call that courageous. Either that or foolhardy. Some might just call it adventurous. But I wonder if anybody here has had a time when they have had to be courageous. Just think about it. When have you had to be courageous? Anybody got any ideas? Oh, Carol.
The first time I came down an abseil tower.
Whoa, that's pretty courageous, isn't it? Anybody else got an example of? Ricky?
Getting out of bed this morning.
Well done. Actually, funnily enough, when I asked one of the youth leaders what courageous meant to her, she said, well, actually going to the youth club, so...
Mothers having babies.
Ah, very good, mothers having babies. Any more courageousness around here? Yes, Emma?
Moving to a foreign country to live.
Moving to a foreign country to live. That does take some courage, doesn't it? Letting go of all that you're used to. Today is Racial Justice Sunday. And it reminded me that I'd heard that last week was the birthday of Rosa Parks. On December the 1st, 1955, Rosa's polite refusal to give up her bus seat sparked a protest movement that changed the United States of America. Rosa's journey that Thursday began like many others. She finished work, boarded a bus home, and sat just behind the seating reserved for white passengers. After a few stops, the bus began to fill up. When the driver saw a white man standing, he told Rosa and 3 other African Americans to give up their seats. Rosa refused. The police arrived and told her that if she didn't move, she would be arrested. Rosa defied cultural, legal, and social pressure by simply replying, "You may do that." Inspired by Rosa's arrest, the Montgomery bus boycott began and lasted more than a year. Her simple act of non-violent protest attracted national attention and eventually resulted in changes to the laws of the land. A courageous woman, I think you'll agree. Well, there's someone else going to show a bit more courage this morning, and that's Nick. Nick, come and be courageous for me. Okay, so Nick has agreed to be courageous, and the courageous thing I'm going to ask him to do is to eat something I'm going to offer him without knowing what it is. Now, you'll be pleased to know that I did check with Nick that he wasn't allergic to anything, and he said only turtle soup. So, for health and safety reasons, I can assure you there's no turtle soup involved. So would you like to put this blindfold on? Now, I was thinking, I wonder if Nick's had breakfast this morning. So I started thinking about what he might have for breakfast. Should I give him porridge? Should I give him chocolate, whatever? Should I give him Weetabix? I thought, if I made Weetabix and brought it from home when we've been here an hour already, it'd be, you know how ghastly it gets? So Nick, are you ready? You don't know what this is going to be, and I think this is amazingly courageous of him. I'm not even going to tell you. You might be able to see, some of you. Shh. Okay, Nick, are you ready for this? The courageous man at St. Mary's. Open wide. Brilliant. I offered him a Malteser. That was kind, wasn't it? But Nick now is going to be very kind and bring our reading, and we're going to hear about another courageous man. We're going to hear about Nehemiah.
Okay, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I'd never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me." You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified, but I replied, "Long live the king! How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." The king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" "With a prayer to God of heaven," I replied. "If it pleases the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." The king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the provinces west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make the beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself." And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. When I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, I delivered the king's letters to them. The king, I should add, had sent along army officers and horsemen to protect him. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thanks, Nick. In about 440 BC, and we're trying to relate Nehemiah's story to our story and our times. Douglas introduced the series last Sunday, and that was recorded, and it now is on the St Mary's YouTube site. So if you go to St Mary's YouTube, we've now got a new section when we're recording these sermons, certainly for this month. Jerusalem had been overrun by the Babylonian army, and the educated and middle-class residents had been taken away to the city to serve the Babylonian king. Last week we heard how Nehemiah had been overwhelmed with sadness when he heard that a new disaster had befallen those left behind in Jerusalem. He really felt their pain, and he wept and mourned, fasted and prayed for his fellow Israelites. Now, no one working for a king was expected to show their feelings in the presence of the king. So Nehemiah would have been trying really, really hard not to show his sadness. He was the king's cupbearer. In other words, he tasted the king's food, so he was a very trusted official. And he was constantly in the king's presence. Now, we know when we're sad, it's jolly hard to put a smile on your face, isn't it? You've really got to work at it to look happy when inside you are really hurting. But as our reading tells us, Nehemiah did not manage to conceal his sadness totally, and the king spotted it. Now, as you can imagine, this conversation could have gone two ways, couldn't it? The king could have been absolutely furious to see one of his servants expressing emotion and act accordingly. Can you imagine what he might have done? Or he could have asked, "Why are you sad?" Now, do you remember what I said about Nehemiah's reaction when he first heard the news from Jerusalem? How he wept and mourned and fasted and prayed. In other words, he talked to God. He involved God in his sorrow. So we shouldn't be surprised with the king's response when he asked Nehemiah why he was sad. Needless to say, Nehemiah was terrified, but he didn't give way to his fear. Indeed, he showed great courage in his reply. He very bravely explained how hearing about the decimation of Jerusalem, the city of his ancestors, he couldn't help but be unhappy. Then, even more surprisingly, the king asked how he could help. I'm sure in his prayers and time to himself, the situation must have gone round and round and round in Nehemiah's head. He would have been playing over in his mind all the things he would have liked to have done to help his fellow Israelites. But I don't suppose any of those thoughts involved asking the king for help. But he was given that opportunity now. So after a quick arrow prayer, I don't know whether you've ever done that, you found yourself in a situation where, Lord, please help me. I think that's what Nehemiah did at that. So after his quick arrow prayer, he boldly asked to be sent back to Judah to help rebuild the city. Not only that, but even more courageously, he asked for more than his release to go and help, but also for letters of safe passage, so that he would get there without any hitches, and a letter from the king requesting timber from the royal forests to help with the rebuilding work. We set the scene earlier, didn't we? With Nick being courageous and eating, not knowing what it was I was going to offer him, tantalizing him with some ghastly options, only to give him chocolate. It was a bit of fun, wasn't it? But it took trust. We heard about Rosa Parks too. Writing about her life, author Parker Palmer wrote this: "You and I may not have Rosa Parks' particular battle to fight. But if Rosa Parks' story is to help us discern our own vocations, we must see her as the ordinary person she was. That will be difficult to do because we have made her into a superwoman, and we have done it to protect ourselves. If we can keep Rosa Parks in a museum as an untouchable icon of truth, we will remain untouchable as well. We can put her on a pedestal and praise her, world without end, never finding ourselves challenged by her life." Many issues of injustice seem too big for us to tackle, don't they? We may ask ourselves, what difference can I make to the devastating effects of climate change, or bullying, or exploitation, or human trafficking? We may feel overwhelmed by any, if not all, of these issues, paralyzed because we can't do everything. So, we do nothing. When Rosa Parks made that brave decision to stay seated on the bus, she didn't know the domino effect that it would have. She made a simple choice, the only one available to her in that moment. She made the stand she could. And God used that choice, that simple act, to bring the civil rights movement to the attention of her whole nation. When Nehemiah courageously spoke out to King Artaxerxes, he had no idea how his actions would be part of the beginning of the restoration of God's people in Judah. And as we read on further through the Old Testament and into the New Testament, we find that Nehemiah was part of God's plan. But as we read, or Nick read in verse 8 there, the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on him. The gracious hand of God is on each one of us too. God has a call on our lives. We might not understand what it is now. We may not have even thought that we had a part to play. But I wonder, what's causing you distress right now? What might God be calling you to join in with? What courage are you being asked to show? Why not talk to God about it, as Nehemiah did? And talk to others too. Courage comes in many forms, but in the power of the Spirit, that courage is available to us, just as it was to Nehemiah. Let's pray. Lord, I confess that sometimes I allow the enormity of injustice to paralyze me. Guide me as I read, as I shop, as I play, as I work, as I interact with others, and as I pray. Show me the battles you want me to fight, to see your kingdom come and your will be done for all people. Amen.